Okay, everybody, it's 4 o'clock. Welcome to Victory's virtual workshop, where we unpack a complex economic topic to make it more accessible for you. I'm Patrick Huey, and today is January 17th, 2024. And today we're diving into a fundamental aspect of economic measurement, the Consumer Price Index. So grab your headphones and something to jot down some notes, and join me as we explore what CPI is and why it's important to you, the modern investor. I just want to remind everybody, feel free to jump in the chat, ask any questions, paste your questions in there, and I'll try to answer them as we go along. That is the Q&A button on Zoom. Or if there are more personal questions that need to be taken offline, entailing your exact situation, I'll certainly reach out to you afterwards and we can discuss those. As of last week, a transcript of this week will be available to you on Friday, as well as a video recap for your use. Okay, so let's jump in. All right, let's start at the beginning. What exactly is the Consumer Price Index, often referred to as the CPI? Well, the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, publishes two indexes each month. The Consumer Price Index for all urban customers, or the CPI-U, is the most common that you see out there in the media, and it represents 93% of the U.S. population not living in remote rural areas. Doesn't cover spending by people living in farm households, institutions such as prisons, or on military bases. And CPI-U is the basis of, like we said, all the widely reported CPI numbers that matter to financial markets. At its core, the CPI is a measurement that examines the average change in prices paid by consumers for goods and services over time. It's a vital indicator often used to gauge inflation or deflation in an economy. And obviously, over the last couple of years, it's become a hot topic. Now, picture this. The CPI is a basket, okay? And in that basket are commonly purchased goods and services representing what a typical consumer might buy. The basket includes everything from groceries and housing to healthcare and entertainment. And by tracking the prices of these items over time, economists can analyze how the cost of living is evolving. In other words, does the cost of this basket of goods go up, meaning it's inflationary, or does it go down, indicating that it's deflationary? And how much of that inflation or deflation is the typical consumer experiencing? Now, you might be wondering, how do they calculate this index? The Bureau of Labor Statistics regularly surveys thousands of households, collecting data on their spending habits. The BLS collects about 80,000 prices or so monthly from about 23,000 retail and service establishments. And using that information, they assign weights to different items in the basket based on their significance in an average consumer's budget. CPI divides the consumer market basket into 8 major groups, and you can see those here on the screen. 8 major groups of goods and services, but I'll list them for those who are not joining us on video. They're food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical care, recreation, education and communication, and the catch-all of catch-alls, other goods and services. Now, all these categories of goods and services are weighted based on their impact to the typical consumer. And these weights give each good or service in the CPI an importance relative to all the other goods and services in that market basket. The overall CPI is then calculated by comparing the total cost of the basket in the current period to the cost in the base period, typically the prior month or the prior year. And that gives us the percentage change in prices over time. And while several factors can result in the national CPI being different from your price experience, one major factor is how you actually spend your money. No one on this call is average or typical, and yet we've used that word 4 or 5 times already in describing how the basket is created. So your expenditure weights may be different, sometimes drastically, than how the CPI weighs them. Thus, your personal inflation number may be different than what the CPI or any other measurement gives you. Now that we know what the consumer price index is, let's delve into why it's so crucial, especially for investors. Why should we care about this seemingly abstract number? Well, first, if the CPI shows a consistent rise in prices, as it has recently, your purchasing power decreases over time. What used to cost $100 may now cost $103 at 3% inflation after 1 year, or $110 if inflation is approaching 10%, as it was in late 2022. This impacts everything from your daily expenses. Anybody try to buy eggs lately? To big ticket purchases and investments. In short, it affects your financial plan. And the estimates that we used for inflation may be in need of updating based on the last couple of years. Now, we've done that for most clients, but if you're one that hasn't seen an update to your inflation projections, please let us know. Secondly, the CPI is a key tool for policymakers. Governments and some central banks use it to set economic policies, especially monetary policies. If inflation is too high, they might adjust interest rates upward to cool down the economy. See 2023, where the Fed rose rates dramatically over the last year. Now, on the other hand, if inflation is too low or deflationary, as we feared way back in 2008 and 2009, the Fed will take measures to stimulate economic activity, including reducing interest rates. Okay, a question that came in as we were getting started. Does the Fed, our own central bank, use CPI for its own inflation targets? And the answer there is no, it does not. It has other inflation measures that it uses, the primary one being the PCE price index, or personal consumption expenditure index, that they started using in 2012 when making their monetary policy decisions. It's a separate inflation report. It's less well known to the general public, and it's published by the Bureau of Economic Analysis instead of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I guess we got to keep the economists employed somewhere. But the Fed prefers the PCE-PI, which is a mouthful, over the comparable consumer price index, CPI, because they say the PCE-PI better reflects changes to consumer spending, such as selecting substitute goods due to price changes, and it covers a broader range of spending. So there you have it. So if the Fed isn't using CPI, why does the media seemingly obsess over it? Mostly because, as we said, no one knows much about that PCE price index that the Fed prefers, and the CPI is the most popular proxy for inflation. So it can literally move markets. And if you don't believe me, the October report came out in mid-November and showed improvement in reported CPI and what they call core CPI, which strips out the volatile food and energy prices, which are more volatile than other categories. And the report sparked, as one CNBC article put it, quote, a major rally on Wall Street. Well, I'll say, after mid-November, markets rallied with many indexes turning positive for the first time all year. And as for the slight swoon that began at the beginning of this year, well, much of that came after last week's report that December's CPI was slightly worse than expected. So CPI, despite not being a Fed-used monetary instrument, it is still a market mover. Okay, our key takeaways for this week. First, Consumer Price Index measures the change in consumer prices based on a typical basket of goods and services over time. As the saying goes, your results may vary. Second, the CPI is the most widely used measure of inflation, and it is closely followed by some policymakers and most major media outlets. Third, the widely quoted CPI is based on an index covering 93% of the US population. The related index covers wage earners, farm workers, clerical workers, and is used for cost of living adjustments to federal benefits. Fourth, the CPI is based on about 80,000 price quotes collected monthly from some 23,000 retail and service establishments, as well as 50,000 rental housing units. And fifth, this renting housing piece is important. Housing rents are used to estimate the change in shelter costs, including owner-occupied housing, and that accounts for about a third of the CPI on average. Though much more right now as rents and housing have gone through the roof, as they say, through a period of rapid increase. And CPI can move markets, even though it's not the exact measurement used by the US Central Bank for inflation. And there you have it. The Consumer Price Index, a fundamental measure that shapes economic decisions and impacts your everyday life, whether you know it or like it or not. No questions in the queue, so thanks for being with me today. We'll see you next week when I have a feeling that the topic will probably be tax related. It's just that time of year. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.